Welcome to the Startup Show. And today we're talking to Ankit Bhateja of Xovian Technologies. And what we're talking to him about is one of the most fascinating industries in India at the moment, the space industry. Now, literally getting people out there, getting satellites out there. And now a lot of people across the planet and in India are not entirely sure of why we have a space industry. Why do we build rockets? Why do we send satellites out there? Why do we waste so much money on this? Or waste, is waste the right word for this situation? So to talk about all of that and more, we've got Ankit on the show. Thanks so much for joining us, Ankit.
Thank you so much.
So Ankit, before we get into everything else, what do you do in the space industry and what is Xovian Technologies?
Yeah, so we are a bootstrap startup. We founded in 2011 and incorporated as a company in 2014. So with 2011 to 2014, we used to conduct different activities for the academia, like different meetups for the space, and we had a Facebook group. So there we used to interact with the people and used to conduct different space events. Mostly it was related to the interaction with the students, just to provide them a platform if someone has an idea regarding space, so they can present their idea there and interact with the other people with this from the same domain. So later on in 2012, we got to know that there is a competition which takes place in the United States. So it's a CANSAT competition. So there the students used to go and participate in that competition. So there they used to build a miniaturized version of a satellite in a can. So it's like a soda can. So in which you develop a miniaturized version of a satellite. So they launched it with.
Like the working satellite or just a model?
Yeah, so it's like a proper working satellite only. So if you know that satellite has a computer in it, and it has a payload, and it also has some sensors that collects data from the environment. So what we do here is that we take the commercially available components that students and researchers utilize in their research projects. So we connect them in such a way that it can demonstrate the working of the satellite. So this is how that competition takes place. So launching of satellite, it takes place with the help of a rocket. So that rocket goes to an altitude of 2 kilometers. So there it ejects the satellite with the help of a parachute. Okay. So that parachute descends to the ground, and during that descending, it sends the data back to the ground station, which is the laptop. So in the laptop, we observe the readings that are coming from the module, which is a miniaturized version, that is CANSAT. So that data is further analyzed and utilized for the further research work. So what happens that from India there was very less participation in this thing, because the cost of this module used to be around $1,000. So $1,000 is not money which Indian students can bear in their college and schools. So what we did is that we made a indigenous CANSAT module just to make the students understand these concepts, and this module is much more affordable. With that modules, the cost of this module is around 2,200 rupees, so which is far lesser than that as compared to the other module. So that is around 65,000, and this one is 2,200 in Indian currency. So we try to target the Indian students with this module. So far we have conducted these sort of activities with around 7,000 students across the country. So it's like 24 states of India we have covered with this. So till 4 years we were totally into this thing. And in 2014 we took the next step, which is high altitude ballooning. So in order to reach to the real satellite domain, so you need to first cover the different steps. As I'm from computer science, and the other founder, Raghav Sharma, is from chemical background. So we both are from different background and not from aerospace. So in order to do something in aerospace, you need to take some basic steps that will lead to the foundation of the strong aerospace background. So we started with the CANSAT, which is totally education based projects. And later on we move to the high altitude ballooning. So in this we launch a balloon that goes to an altitude of 40 to 45 kilometers, and from there it collects the data from the near space region, and that data is further sent to the ground station with the help of radio frequency,
So,
and data is utilized for research work.
so what kind of data do you collect? I mean, who does it? You say it comes down to the ground, but who does it go to?
Yeah,
How does it help us?
yeah, yeah. So if we talk about India, so there are some organizations that are involved in high altitude ballooning. So it's similar to the weather balloon.
Hmm.
So in weather balloon, you collect the weather data.
Hmm.
In high altitude ballooning, you make a customized platform in which you yourself decide that what sort of data you are looking for. So this data could be of the solar radiation, it could be cosmic radiation. You can also go for the earth imaging, so that imaging can be utilized for the further image processing part, and the information can be extracted from those images. So this
I
sort
mean,
of
okay.
activities are connected to the high.
I mean, can we break it down a little bit more so the viewer to understand? For example, solar radiation. What is the benefit to
Yeah,
understanding
yeah,
solar radiation? I mean, would our lives
yeah.
be so different
So
if we didn't understand it?
uh, right, right. So solar radiation, if we talk about, if you have heard of the solar radiation which is coming up from the sun, it affects our magnetic field. The Earth has a magnetic field, so it affects the magnetic field of Earth. So when the solar wind blows, so it affects the working of the magnetic field. So these sort of studies have an impact in the scientific communities, that how the other planets, like if you talk about Venus, so we say that Venus was sometime it was it used to be like Earth. So due to the strong solar winds and due to the strong greenhouse effect, it converted into the current planet, which is very hot and which is unable to, sustain any life there. So these sort of researches, it helps us to study like how the future of Earth is going to be with the help of these sort of solar radiation and cosmic radiations. So
Okay.
cosmic radiation is something else. It affects the satellites also. It affects the space, the people that go out in the space for the space stations, and also they are affected by the cosmic radiation. So that the effect of those radiations can also be studied with the high altitude balloon platforms.
Okay, so that's very
Yeah.
fascinating. And so, Ankit, I want to talk to you. Before we were talking about your company, we were talking about satellites, but I want to talk to you now about generally the field of space, right? There are a lot of people doing different things. Some people are building rockets, some people are building satellites like yourself, some people are just building components. But is there really a market for the space industry, or is it all government funded right now? Like, how do you make money in the space industry?
Yeah, so if you talk about the current situation from the Indian perspective, so the current situation in India is sort of struggling. So you need to have a side source for the money making in order to put that money into the research work. So as I told you about the CanSat and the other activities which we conduct, so this is how we generate the money. So this is our main money source. And if we talk about the total aerospace domain, so it is very struggling in India. If we talk about the 2018, if you are talking about, so the thing is that if we take a larger perspective of this thing, so talking about next 5 years. So first, if we see the US and European market, so you must have heard of SpaceX and other companies that are betting huge money in this domain. So what is happening is that since big companies are targeting the two main objectives. First one is the establishing some sort of human settlement on other planets, and the second thing is exploring the asteroids for the minerals and other resources. So if we talk about the resources, natural resources which are on Earth, that are very limited. So you cannot generate a coal in 10 years, you cannot make petroleum in 5 years. So it takes a lot of time
Right.
to generate these things. So companies are trying to explore the asteroids that are full of minerals and other resources. So the plan is to bring down those resources from those asteroids so that those resources can be utilized on Earth. So companies are betting huge on these things.
What kind
Yeah,
of resources can you find on asteroids? Is it like actual coal or petrol, or
yeah,
is it like more like minerals? What do you find on asteroids?
yeah. So it's basically asteroids is a mine that contains each and every mineral which is available on Earth. It's like gold, silver, and coal, you can a lot of coal is there on Earth, but mainly the resources are like titanium and the precious metal resources and alloys that we can get from the asteroid. So a recent study shows that there was some asteroid which was revolving around the Earth, and it is estimated around $3 quadrillion. So
Wow.
this is why companies are willing to put billions of dollars, because ultimately they are going to fetch quadrillions of dollars from these asteroids. So
Okay.
there is a company. Are you getting my video?
Yeah, yeah, that's all working
Hello.
fine. So,
Yeah.
hi.
Yeah. So
Can you hear us?
companies. So companies are betting hard on these things. So there's a company named Deep Space Industries. So this company is betting on the asteroid mining process. So they have developed some machinery to mine the asteroids in space. But all the machinery and all these innovations are in testing phase, because testing something in space environment is very difficult. So whatever you are doing on Earth, it is not necessary that this thing is definitely going to work in the outer space as well. So it requires a lot of testing. It requires a lot of hard work to take the instruments to space, so that these instruments can really work in the outer space. So this is how the companies are trying to bid on this process. So if we talk about from Indian perspective, so you must have heard of the ISRO launch of 104 satellites. So out of those 104 satellites, 88 satellites were of a company named Planet Labs. So this company makes nano satellite for the Earth observation. So now, if you launch a satellite in space, it requires a lot of money. If you are launching it from European or US, from the US. So that's why they are preferring India, because the launch cost here is very less. So talking from the launch cost perspective, India is the suitable market, and talking from the manufacturing also, India is also a suitable market for the manufacturing of the space components and space related material. And if you
Okay.
talk about from the other perspective, China is also betting hard on this domain, but currently Chinese space program is far behind the Indian space program. So that this is how India has an important role in this.
Okay, so now I think we've broken down how you make money, right? So you can make money either through the end process of asteroid
Yeah,
mining or space travel, or you can make money in the
yeah,
manufacturing and the development, which is cheaper in India, so we get better clients. But I've got to
yeah,
ask,
right,
I mean,
right.
you guys are bootstrapped, but how hard is it to find
Hmm,
investment in for a space firm in India? I mean, because I've talked to a few of the space firms
hmm,
in India
hmm.
over the last few months, and all of them
Yeah,
say
yeah.
explaining the idea, right? Saying, listen, you're not going to make money for 1 year. You might not make money for 10 years, but after that, you can
Hmm,
make some
hmm.
money. Explaining that time
Yes,
frame
right.
is very, a lot of investors get scared
Definite,
off by that. They say, why should I do that? Why can I'll
definite.
just go invest in
Hmm,
Flipkart
hmm,
today, right? Why should I invest in this
hmm,
company that
hmm,
maybe
hmm.
will make money in a decade? So
Yes,
how do you,
yes.
like, is there a good investment, is it a good investment opportunity to get into space companies?
Yeah, so actually, as you said that finding investment in this domain is difficult. There are two reasons I will say that in India, if you talk about the Startup India campaign, it was started in 2015. So before 2015, and if you talk about the Indian population, around 5 to 10% people you could able to find which were like aware of the word name startup. So after
Hmm.
2015, it was a like a, you can say a lot of craze that took place in the country, and everybody was talking about startup, startup, startup. So even the college students, school students, everyone was like startup and startup. So that's why what happened that there are two things. If you're a bootstrap startup, you take some 3 to 4 years to bootstrap, and then you look for the scale up support. And if you talk about the just for the craze of startup, or what the people will do is that they will just think of an idea today, and tomorrow they will just jump into the investment part. So this trend which just jumping into the investment on the very next next day has resulted in a lot of problems for the startups like us, because now the investors are looking for more equity just because of those idea phase startups that directly jumped into the investments. So what happens that, just for an example, I will tell you that some my known friend was there, so they just thought of an idea, and next day they just approached the investor for the investment. The idea was good, and the investor asked for 51% equity. So now so investor asked for 51% equity, and they were ready to give it for just for 25 lakh rupees. So now this trend has affected a lot of startups. So now if a startup which is bootstrap, that startup approaches the investor, so now the investor will also ask for the very big equity in order to shed off some money for that. So this trend has created a lot of problem in this startup ecosystem. And other part is the policy part, which is like hard for the manufacturing and aerospace startups like us. So what happened that the policies that were made, they were like optimum and good for the IT based startups. So in general, the policies affected the IT based startups, but for us the policies are not there particularly for the manufacturing domain. So because manufacturing domain is entirely different from the IT and other sort of startups, so that is why like the startups like us, we seek different sort of policies in order to nurture the startup like us, so that we can also be the part of the startup ecosystem and create a value addition in the Indian economy. So as of now, it is like difficult to generate money and out of the manufacturing domain. But yes, in 4 to 5 years, I will see that there are a lot of opportunities that are coming for the Indian market, because since India, there is only one organization which is working on the space industry, which is ISRO only, and startups are slowly coming up in this domain. It's not like the US market where SpaceX and all, they are working on their own rockets. So we have different sort of policies here, there are restrictions here, and there are a lot of diplomatic and government involvement is there in this domain, but slowly it will open up. So ISRO is also now outsourcing their projects to the private industry. So this is definitely going to help and create the doorway for the private ecosystem in India.
Okay. Well, Ankit, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really illuminating conversation about the space market in India. And this has been the latest episode of Startup Stars. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.